Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode on Founders Tribe, a podcast production presented by thestartupchef.com. This is once again your host, Sven Milder, and like every week, I invite inspiring global movers and shakers to the show to casually chat about successful strategies they have deployed to found and build awesome businesses and live fulfilling lives. At the Startup Chef, we are on a mission to elevate and inspire 100,000 founders globally to help them shortcut their road to success by offering easy access to investment capital and world-class expertise. If you want to discover more or download one of our free resources that can help you propel your business forward, visit us at thestartupchef.com. Thestartupchef.com. In today's show, we welcome good friend and client Ravid Chowdhury. As a partner of RC Ventures, one of the active venture firms in Dhaka, he's investing in technology companies with portfolios including Pathao, Lagbe, Kajkey, Ending Scene, and Jitum. As for Ravid, this guy has achieved so much big bang milestones in a relatively short life. You got to hear this story. He has led and sit in the board of multiple startups in Bangladesh. Prior to building, growing, and running startups and making early stage investments, he worked in private equity all over the world. He was the first CFO of Pathao, Bangladesh's largest ride-sharing service, and managed to raise at a $100 billion valuation and led the company through several funding rounds, including the GO-JEK investments. In today's show, I will talk with Ravid about Bangladesh being the new tech hub in the making, the ingredients to build successful startups, the importance of storytelling when you go out to raise, and why you should test all your startup hypotheses and ignore your ego. Welcome to the show. Well, Ravid, my dear friend, client as well, currently being hosted by New York City, is today in our show. Welcome, Ravid. Super cool to have you here in another kind of environment that we are normally working with. We have a client relationship, we build a friendship around it, and it's truly exponential to see what you have all been up to. So, to really kickstart the show immediately with some cool stuff. I mean, if people didn't see your appearance and they would just check your track record, right? It would be almost easy to believe that you're actually a very old guy. But taking into the account that you have already did so many significant track records and achievements, I mean, the contrast is completely different. You are alive, young, and kicking. An amazing international exposure, Hong Kong, New York, even in the Netherlands, what I noticed well, where I coming from, various roles from investors, working in the private equity space, board of directors, associate, founders. I mean, you have worn so many caps already in a very young age in your life. But before we really jumping into all of these business achievements that you have been realizing, I would like to check in on a personal level, what were actually the biggest lessons that you have taken away from all of this international exposure and being active in so many roles?
Yeah, very big question. Thank you, Sven. That was a really kind and generous introduction. So thank you for that. I'm really excited to be here with you today for the podcast. So thank you for inviting me.
You're welcome.
I guess from which specific experience would you want me to draw from?
Well, I think for us in the podcast, it's all about knowing really who you are, and I think you can be really proud of what you have been achieving actually in a very young age, and having such an international exposure, being active in many different kind of companies, but all with a very strong focus. I just want to know on a personal level, bringing all of your past experiences to today, what have been your main insights and lessons that you have took away from being internationally exposed in a variety of roles?
I mean, I have to just admit, right? Like everything was an accident, as it is for most people.
Yeah.
I didn't begin my. So I'm American, right? Born and raised. I grew up in Connecticut. Went to college in the same state that I went to school in. I went to grad school in New York. But how I'm Bangladeshi by background, and I've always wanted to go back to Bangladesh at some point. I never lived there really, or grew up there, but I want to go back to work at some point just to experience that. And so I did that for 2 years after college as an economic researcher. And that was an experience that, basically after living in America my entire life, was a very different pace of life in Bangladesh, there were still power outages back then, multiple times a day, adjusting to not being able to clean water. It was a conservative country in many ways, but also a huge adventure. And so that's what made me basically fall in love with working in Bangladesh, but also after moving back to the States and working in a PE fund, they moved me out to Asia, and I got a job in an EM, emerging markets private equity fund, because, I wanted to continue working in frontier markets, and traveling. That's one thing I learned from my previous experience that I loved. And, I had definitely seen while working at that PE fund how much opportunity there was. So, we were investing in factories, right? Very large factories doing $20 to $60 million deals. But, at the same time, when I was traveling to Vietnam, Indonesia, Cambodia, Bangladesh, I was seeing those markets changing. And so that's when, with some friends, my friend had founded Pathao and asked me to help, with this ride-sharing idea, and he needed someone who had a finance background. So, there was no money at the time.
Yeah.
And there I was, and we were happy to share an apartment together. Yeah. And, I reached that same point that I feel a lot of people do in a corporate job. After 4 or 5 years, they want to do something different, take a risk, right? Yes. Change it up. So I didn't leave my job initially. I had helped as an acting CFO, built their first pitch deck financial model, strategized with the team to develop basically the first ride-sharing model, like develop the pricing, everything, right? Planned it all. And then when it started growing very fast, I took the leap. I left my job and joined a startup in Bangladesh for 0 salary and only equity. I just thought, after 1 year, if this doesn't work out, I can go back and get another job. But that didn't happen. It took off like wildfire. And, what I learned from that experience, I had some conviction in this business model that allowed me to make this leap, is that from being able to work at my old company, I would regularly travel to countries like Jakarta, where I saw GO-JEK start just explode. It made sense to me that this model, this two-wheeler model, could be replicated in a country like Bangladesh, high density, low income, limited options, its right pricing point.
Traffic problem.
Traffic as well. So all these kind of made sense. And so I guess I'm really lucky that I had a job that allowed me to travel so much, but and then I continue to do it as a personal, just as you do, right? A lot of us do that, end up moving out to Asia. I've just seen that models that Bangladesh is just reliving a technology curve that other countries have already experienced, right? Yeah. And just like companies were replicated in China, now China's creating companies that we are replicating. The same thing's happening in Bangladesh. So there was just a huge opportunity. I had seen that basically 100 million people had come online within the past 10 years. Yeah, it was nominal when I got there, and then it was rapid shift, and now it's a really exciting time to create the future technology businesses of tomorrow for country like Bangladesh.
So let's indeed jump for a moment to Pathao, which I think is a hell of a great achievement that you have been pulling off here. You have literally, with a small team, built the company in quite a rapid phase into a $100 million valuated company in Bangladesh, by actually also showing the whole ecosystem in Bangladesh that, hey, we are here, you can do amazing stuff as a startup founder, and literally pave the road for other founders. But before we jump into that, I just currently want to know from you, how was the first year for Pathao in Bangladesh, where still a lot of people were actually unfamiliar with the technology? You were one of the first movers. How did, on a macro scale, the country was responding on such a big development?
So Initially, how Pathao began was extremely word of mouth. So the founders, Ilyas and Adnan and Fahad, I was a finance and operations guy. I actually don't have. I raise capital for these companies, work in corporate and work on strategy. Initially, what we had done, though, I still remember, gone to the university, right, and just wanted to test to see if people would be willing to take a motorcycle taxi. I actually thought the answer would be no. In a country like Bangladesh, that it wouldn't, that, like, it's just not culturally there, right? This motorcycle taxis you see all over the world in other markets, very well developed, right? So why wasn't it a thing in Bangladesh? And what companies like GO-JEK and Grab had done in those markets actually just aggregate existing supply of motorcycle.
Exactly, yeah.
Right? Whereas initially this was completely brand new. So what we had done was we went to the university, which was right near our office, and literally waited for when kids got out of class and said, "Hey, you want to take a motorcycle ride to, Donmudi, your hometown? How about 100 taka?" Yeah. And then some college kids did it, right? Those were the early adopters. So the initial users of Pathao were completely college kids, because right nearby us there was about 100. Everything in Bangladesh is big scale.
Yeah.
So like 10 universities, and each of those universities has like 50 to 100,000 students, all in one area. So we just physically had people there. And then we started with the call center. And when the call center scaled, when the call center, started, people would just call, we'd schedule a ride, just like GO-JEK started. And that's when we knew that we had product market fit. And that's when we raised a little bit of capital and launched the app, the mobile app.
So I think what's really interesting, because you're spot on with what you're just mentioning. I mean, GO-JEK, here in Indonesia, there were already tons of motorbikes out there, and there were already guys literally trying to trade their motorcycle and see, okay, take a ride. But just like the traditional taxi industry, there was just no efficiency. So existing supply combined with technology. But do I really understand you? Because I didn't know, is that in Bangladesh there were not any motorcycles. Man.
So there's actually two things that happened. So we were not the first company that had tried this ride-sharing idea in Bangladesh. Other companies had tried and had shut down and failed. The difference was we were very lucky with timing. When we had launched Pathao, there was about 400,000 registered motorcycles in the country. Within 2 years, that became 2 million.
Wow. Yeah.
Right? So there had to be enough motorcycle drivers. Then second, internet penetration. Even if we had started 2 years earlier, internet penetration would not have been to the scale where the drivers themselves would have the smartphones, right? So within a very short period of time, it grew, internet penetration grew 6x, and the market was flooded with cheap, often Chinese brand smartphones, very low data plans. We have 4G internet, right? Even rickshaw pullers have smartphones. Internet penetration about 60, 70%, and connectivity is very strong throughout the city. And now there's millions of motorcycles. So if we had just started even 1 or 2 years earlier, we probably would have been too early. And we were lucky. We did not know that at that time.
So timing is for you significant, right? I mean, maybe we can also talk about that with the current startup that you're working with. But before going inside of there, you had the product market fit, very cool. And then we also see actually that a lot of times founders think too complicated about testing their model, while literally in this example as well, there's a university next to it. And you can just see how people are responding. Was that at the moment? So when did you guys decide to really raise your first round, and how big was that? And how did you convince those investors at that time?
So raising angel capital in countries like Bangladesh is I would say it's relatively easier. Like if we're talking about raising $100,000, $200,000 from high net worths, that is easier. But then you face a real barrier when you're looking to raise beyond that, right? Because the institutional world is very limited, right? It's very, very limited. So basically, it was just personal network and connections that had invested in the very first round. They were friends, former colleagues, or bosses. And then when we had raised a proper $1 million seed round, then I'd actually had to hit the road. Basically, when it comes to Bangladesh, you have to speak to as many people as possible. and just be prepared for a lot of no's, because fundamentally Bangladesh, especially at the time, was not even considered in discretionary allocation. It was not really a focus of many countries or even regional funds. That being said, this has evolved significantly. I think Pathao was a big part of that story. But now many other great companies have also emerged, like Shoppa, backed by Sequoia, Pludio, backed by Seedstars, Chaldal, backed by the IFC, and of course Bcash, which is one of the largest companies.
Yeah.
Alibaba. So it's changed significantly in the past few years, basically.
So the $1 million seed investment that you attracted, was that already capital outside of Bangladesh, or was that still
That was capital outside Bangladesh.
Okay.
And this is another challenge for Bangladesh. Bangladesh's capital control framework is similar to India was 20 years ago, where it's very hard to send money in and out of the country. Hence, it hasn't been an investment destination. This is actually pretty interesting. Prior to 2015, when I was working in PE and we were looking to invest in Bangladesh, it was actually a huge barrier because we couldn't really figure out a way to be able to exit our investments because of the capital control restrictions. There were some really old laws that were still in place. I was actually part of the IFC committee that would meet regularly with other VC and PE professionals, where they actually redrafted the law in 2015 with the new alternative investment laws, which basically opened up Bangladesh for foreign direct investment.
And that's also one of the reasons that, of course, you see a lot of founders incorporated in Delaware or in Singapore to just receive the cash. Interesting. So at that moment, the whole thing literally blew up. And then you get this massive company from Indonesia who sees also the dollar signs, because they see Bangladesh, 170 million people, great demographics, GDP is growing, technology adoption is growing very fast. And then suddenly they see let's replicate that there, right? So how important was it? And that's more like a general question as well. How important do you believe that storytelling in your fundraising strategy is from significant importance to get investors on board?
Oh, Series A is complete storytelling. Series A is complete storytelling. And I'm actually surprised that we even were able to raise, because, I look back at my first pitch deck, right? And compared to what, I'm working with today, right? It was just much lower quality, right? So it was very much the story that was driving that. Obviously you have to have the numbers that can back that up, right? But, I feel that there was a couple things that happened that I always think back to. So timing was one, right? Time was a huge factor. The second one was the unusual high quality of the team, right? We had a CTO who's a genius, coder, developer, former hacker. You have another CEO, also hyper intelligent, one of the most well-read guys I've actually ever met, and also very technical himself. And then you had a few other individuals who were definitely overqualified, right? They include a lot of young Bengali kids who had gotten educated in Canada and US and even worked at a tech company, and then because of visa reasons had to come back to Bangladesh. And so they joined our team not because we could pay anything at the time, but because we're all friends. And so we had this unusual confluence of really smart, sharp men and women that were working together initially, right, to build that. And so it kind of that arbitrage opportunity, you can't just we couldn't have paid fair market rates for everyone. I didn't even take a salary for the first year and a half, right? So not everyone would have that ability to do that, right?
So you already mentioned that timing was one. Second of all, of course, we know the team is incredibly important. But what do we do if we are sitting on a really great idea and we reflecting on ourselves and we don't have the team? And this is more like a lesson for other startup founders. Where do they attract and how? And then again, the storytelling comes there, because you need to motivate people with better skills than you have, or to just fill up the team. So what is your take on that? And how can founders?
That was the last aspect. Sorry to jump in. So the first part was timing. The second part was team. And then the third part, you can have the best team and you have great timing, but if you don't have access to capital or ability to access that capital, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
right? In ride sharing, right? There's maybe some businesses that where you can be achievable, but really, I have also come to a realization that access to capital, particularly in emerging markets, can really be defining.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Really be a defining difference between two teams that are equally competent,
Yeah.
right? They're launching a business at the same time in the same industries, right? If one team has better access to capital and more supportive investors, that'll really drive a huge competitive advantage. And we had that, one, because we had the faith of some very great, well-connected angel investors. We're lucky to have that. And then our team was able to execute in terms of raising capital because we could communicate effectively. We're able to travel to the investors and also create a quality, data rooms, financial model that help you tell the story.
So that's an interesting part, of course. But then still, I would like to know, man, how did you arrive at $100 million valuation? And that's a hell of a story, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so that was part of the story that we were telling. What had happened was we took a strategic play. We had GO-JEK invest in our Series A, which was very early and unusual, right? Mostly you will save strategic investments for later. However, for us, it was a really important opportunity to seize because it would create credibility unparalleled to what we could otherwise achieve for a startup in Bangladesh, right? And so that immediate credibility created momentum and excitement and belief in the Pathao story, which then led to us being able to grow so quickly.
I see almost like a framework coming out of this structure, because at a certain moment you jumped out of or you exited the company Pathao, and you became even more like an aggressive investor yourself in a variety of startups. You're sitting on 5 different kind of investments, as far as I know, taking the board, and then suddenly it starts getting really. You would say, okay, you go more into an investor role, but again, you are very hungry for a new startup where you copy paste an existing framework, don't take any salary, run the finance, and currently you are on a mission to build one of the what I think will be the biggest trucking platform in Bangladesh and maybe as well in neighboring countries. So can you tell me a little bit more? What is your current journey and what are you building?
Sure. So after I had exited Pathao, the company had achieved more than what I had hoped in a very short period of time. And, the company was at a new stage of development. So I took a liquidity event, had a partial exit. I'm still on Team Pathao, so I still have a chunk in there. And I think the company will be a $1 billion company eventually. I still do believe that. So then I took that capital and I thought, okay, so I did my, couple years at a startup. I can, and it worked out. I can either go back and get another job, or I could, which was the plan, or I could, see if I can if I could work with other founders, right? Because I really enjoyed that and build something amazing again. Yeah. But this time leveraging what I've learned, but also leveraging the relationships and connections I've made fundraising for Pathao. Because there are a lot of fantastic founders and companies in Bangladesh, but they need to be found, and someone needs to tell their story. Because sometimes, for many reasons, a founder can be a great executor, but not maybe a great storyteller.
Yeah, exactly. I always like to say, like, okay, you can have a mediocre company and an amazing story, and you will find your funds. Exactly. You can be a great company and a shitty storyteller, and you will never find your funds, right?
Exactly. But just to close that, so I took that capital and I invested it in 5-6 startups. I divided my time to see if I could help all of them. I quickly learned that Ravid, as a one-person entity, very quickly your time gets taken up, right? Yeah. So at most I could handle a few startups. I could really provide quality time to a few startups, built their financial models, data room, led on strategy, attended weekly meetings on growth and marketing, really refined their business model and their unit economics. Even it was kind of beautiful, but I was also able to get the portfolio companies to speak to each other. If one company was great at growth hacking, they would then share knowledge with another company. So that's what I had been doing, and so one of the biggest winners out of that so far has been Lagbe. And so I invested in Lagbe because, again, from my experience traveling and living in Hong Kong and Singapore, I had seen the growth, and also in China, seeing the growth of the online truck booking industry, and saw that there was no large player yet in Bangladesh. But I had seen that there were a few competitors emerging. Actually, at the time, there was about 5 companies competing. So I used my PE experience, and I put all the companies through, information. I met with all the companies. I, asked for information checklists, understood what the market dynamics were, and then determined that Lagbe was not only the best team, but truly was an exceptional team that I believed could capture the market. And I immediately hit it off with Anayat, right? Because these things are like marriages. I talk to him almost every day. And it's been a fantastic journey. So when I invested in Lagbe, they were doing about 100 trips a month. And today they're getting close to about 10,000 trips a month. And they serve large customers, including Pepsi and Unilever and Arla, Frito-Lay's, among many others. And so, again, this is a business model and there are several unicorns regionally. However, none of them are active in competing with in Bangladesh. And so Lagbe has swiftly and for very, relatively low investment, captured the market with 50,000.
Yeah, and of course taking the best practices from your previous experience. So when you say like, okay, you did an information check on all of these companies, you were already advocating to them that you wanted to do something similar in Bangladesh. So you were very open about your intentions to them.
After being the CFO of Pathao, I would regularly get deal flow, basically, right? And so very quickly in the ecosystem, which is very small, people knew that, Ravid was going to become an active angel investor. And so, I was actively seeking deal flow. Several people knew about my investment in the market. So, when I wanted to meet with a company, it wouldn't be very difficult for me to get access to some of these companies or deals to get an idea of because, all of them, I'm potentially exploring the market and always surprised by what I'm learning. So I just leveraged my PE and VC experience and just conducted the process as if I was an associate, right? As an individual, you have to be your associate, principal, and GP. Once I find a company I like, I'm usually very excited very quickly. So I do have informal investment committee, which is other angel investors and former Pathao investors, Lagbe investors, who I syndicate deals with. And we all look at it together and then make a determination if we'll do it.
So I think because we also maintain a client relationship and we have helped you guys feel part of your round. What I really admire about you, and if I see that also in your whole career, is that you just do the right things at the right time, right? I mean, also if you see your current cap table, if you see your current evolvement of the company, it looks almost like you very consciously look for your partners, right? You have engagement with investors that have been investing in similar startups. Did you really go out to strategize all of these moves? Because if you do it early stage, it comes back to you later on, and getting the big brother maybe want to work with you. Can you share to the audience as well a little bit like how your way of thinking is for people to do that? Because you're still in Bangladesh. We all know that Bangladesh is an exponential growth market in the coming 10 years. I'm very bullish about that, but we need to fight more like we need to bang ourselves through the wall, right? So in this case, again, you're connecting with other investors from other geographies who have made investments in similar companies like Lagbe, and you still motivate them to jump in. And most probably, what we will see is that the big companies will come and to help to support you with your journey. So what is this reverse engineering strategizing that people can learn from?
I mean, I'm still very young, but I've already encountered many issues with several startups, right? Like, I've invested in 5 startups. One of them, Lagbe, has done very well. Some are doing okay. Some have done not so great for various reasons, right? So you start developing pattern recognition or things that can happen. disputes between founders or employees. In early stage companies happens, and these things can get very emotional very quickly. I've seen how these things can unfold. I think all VCs and angels do this. They just, based on what they learn from their previous investment experiences, they try to hedge or address that in some way in their further investments. So that's all it's been at this stage. But if I can speak to working with a startup chef, I mean, it was amazing, particularly because we had raised, before Startup Chef, we had raised $1 million. And, with my network, I felt pretty confident I would be able to raise our Series A. But as we know, COVID happened, right? Yeah. And so our Series A leads had all wanted to put that on pause.
Yeah.
And so, just like other startup founders, when your fundraising plans have been significantly delayed and there was significant uncertainty, it was very important that, we do three things. We reduce our costs, right? Extend our burn, and raise additional capital if possible.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
However you can.
Yeah.
And so when COVID had hit, we did need to raise capital. Yeah. And I was on the phone every day.
I know, man.
Right? Yeah, you were as well.
Yeah.
And so what was amazing with the Startup Chef is that it expanded our network, because at the end of the day, I've never really been able to close a deal or raise capital for someone if I reach out to them cold. It always has to be through a warm introduction, and not only just warm introduction, that's someone that has a strong network and good judgment, right? And so that's what we definitely got with the Startup Chef, has an amazing network. It also helps that you yourself were part of Ritase and you understand our industry. Yes. So it was just kind of like it worked out super well for us, and it continues to be very helpful.
Awesome. Well, thanks for the heads up. So I want to talk a little bit more about Bangladesh. We are already very bullish about that. What I truly love, I mean, I don't want to shoot anyone in the finger, but I think the characteristics of Bangladesh people are heartwarming. Their technological development skills are really, really good. Their English language, right? The only barrier seems to be, the government needs to make it more like an investor-friendly climate. Nevertheless, the demographics are truly making sense to make it a next big tech hub. But what do you see the current challenges for Bangladesh, and what do you see actually if we discuss the current challenges, where will it go in 10 years from now? What kind of benchmarks can we expect? So current challenge and where is it all going?
Yeah, so I think the current challenge for Bangladesh right now is addressable market size for certain industries is still a question. For trucking, it's a huge industry no matter what, right? Trucking for Bangladesh is on the small end a $10 billion industry, but for trucking that's tiny when you have countries like US and China, which are somewhere between 600 and 800 billion, right? And our next door neighbors at India is about 50 billion. But a $10 billion market is not bad to attack, especially one that's growing at 7 to 8% a year. That being said, when you look at other markets, they're very restricted by the GDP per capita, which is currently about $2,000. But again, when I talk about Bangladesh, it's such a high growth country. It's the second fastest growing country in the world, right? And since I've been living in and out of Bangladesh since 2012, since 2010, I have seen the economy and country evolved dramatically. People's incomes doubled.
Yeah, amazing.
Right? Yeah. It went from houses on main boulevard to glass and steel buildings.
Yeah.
Right? I don't know what it was, but I still remember I was very interested in tech in 2012. But I remember the main challenge was finding good local tech talent. But then the thing was, I learned, this is also very interesting, Bangladesh is one of the second largest tech outsourcing population.
Exactly. Yeah.
So there was actually a lot of amazing tech talent, but they were all unwilling to work for a local Bangladesh tech company because they're like, why would I do that? I can make way more money on Upwork or Fiverr.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? So why would I work for you in Bangladesh for a local Bangladesh salary? And that was true. There was not tech company couldn't really pay, and people were not willing to work for a local tech company. And there was also many people on our team even today that they were working completely remotely for an offshore company, right? our head of product worked remotely for a Silicon Valley-based company. So to leave that is a big jump for a local company. So that was one thing. We had tapped into those networks and also broken that barrier of people being able to work for a local company and solve technology problems for Bangladesh. Which
needs to feel good, of course, right? They're helping their own country.
And I think that's the reason why at our company our retention is at Pathao and Lagbe has been amazing, because you can sense. I had an investor tell me this when they do due diligence. This investor had gone and spoken to everyone, even asked someone in the call center, what is the mission of Pathao? What is the vision? Why do you work here? Same at Lagbe. They had asked questions to people from the call center, to the ops teams, to the tech team. And these teams don't talk necessarily. And everyone was aligned on what the mission was. Like, we're solving a huge problem for our country. And they were excited about it. And they were excited to tell their families about it. And these companies have become very visible, just like technology has become very visible everywhere else. So it's changed dramatically.
I think this is more like what is the official saying of it? It's more like something that can really, really explode. So if we are going in the 10 years, sometimes we say like, okay, Bangladesh is a little bit like what Indonesia was 5 years ago. Where do you see this all going? I quickly identify already. Pathao can be what you say, $1 billion startup. Lagbe can be $1 billion startup. Of course, let's not forget Chowdhury, which is doing an amazing job. Bcash, which is already $1 billion startup. So it looks like there's many success stories coming from the country, right? So where is this all going, and how will that impact maybe your investors?
It's still early. It's still early days and frontier market. However, that is changing very quickly. Very quickly. In the sense that, yes, GDP per capita is $2,000. Just like 7 years ago, it was $1,000. It's going to surpass India on a GDP per capita basis. It's a country of 180 million people, which will be about 200 million people. So you're talking about the 8th largest country in the world that is already sizable and is growing quickly. So in 10 years, I really believe it's going to surpass other regional peers, right? And really be at a point where it'll catch up to places like India and Vietnam sooner than we expect. And so that's why investing in tech companies and early stage businesses that are adjusting to this technological and internet shift that is happening that has happened in most other countries. It will happen in Bangladesh, right? It's just definitely going to happen. I think it'll happen much sooner rather than later. It's a very young country. The median age is 26 years old. Young people adopt technology quickly. And I think we're going to be, that's why this large, young, tech-enabled population just going to pay huge demographic dividends.
I think there was a beautiful article last week, I guess, around on Tech in Asia, where you guys all get listed very well, where the comparison is made. Bangladesh is the new Indonesia. I strongly believe in that, and maybe as well, quoting one of the things that was in the articles, that the investor just needs to have a bit more patience, right? I was as well reading another article this morning in the Dutch newspaper. Actually, what happens in Indonesia is that there is just more focus on driving profitability within the companies, and the focus is also more from a VC angle to fund companies that are sustainable rather than funding the companies that are going for growth and growth. Because if you're looking into GO-JEK, you see that they have laid off almost 9 or 10% of all of their people. They have shut down a lot of these services. Traveloka, Logical is a travel platform. So I think you should also, as a Bangladeshi, use this time currently to build something very sustainable. And investors just need to have a bit more patient, I guess, in seeing how the companies can literally rise, right? Because I think the world of fast-moving, super fast growing is a little bit over. I mean, how do you see that with your current investor conversations, that growth versus profit, and what is your take on that? Fast growth or profit first?
transform towards profit, transform to profit. And that actually was a big reason also why I was looking at, after being a CFO of a cash burning ride sharing company, consumer, a B2C business. When I saw Truck Lagbe and I saw the business model, a B2B business that makes money from day one, I immediately was very excited about it. But yeah, absolutely. Fundraising for Truck Lagbe, that has become the key focus. Cash is king, and you have to create a sustainable business. That being said, history often repeats itself. Interest rates are low. We're going to be seeing, the free money age of 2014, 2015 likely repeat itself. I'd be surprised if it didn't. In some time. Right now, valuations are down for some companies, but for a lot, things have not changed too much. The good companies I'm seeing are still asking for relatively stable or high valuations.
Yeah. Or maybe it's just like, I have many times actually questioned myself, maybe what it was like 18 months ago. The whole world was not necessarily on fire in a negative way, but everybody was sitting on this large, big balloon, and they're just spending and more investments and higher valuations. I think the good thing that we can take from this whole COVID era is to just go a little bit back to normal, and let's see if it becomes a new normal here. So on another note, right? So
the tech IPOs in ride sharing were very sobering for ride sharing. Other tech IPOs, if anything, other tech IPOs are probably going to be driving up valuation. I'm sure the next question is going to be, do you think this can be a $1 trillion industry? Right? People are not going to be asking for $1 billion industries anymore.
No. But don't you think that's a bit, of course, if you see Amazon, right, with crazy valuations, I don't know if you have read it, but there was, of course, this whole story around Apple. And Apple was, I guess, what was it? Yeah, it was like 2 trillion.
Apple's about to pass 2 trillion.
Yeah.
So, honestly, I think it makes a lot of sense. One, COVID-19 has accelerated the digital transformation, and then two, then there's federal and monetary and fiscal policy, which is driving this. Particularly the Fed. If the Fed indicates they're going to prop up markets, and then yes, and it's a low interest rate environment, then it's going to keep on going up. Yeah, right? As soon as the Fed indicates that they would not keep on supporting the markets, then I just think you'd see a drop.
I think to put it in perspective, because we easily talk about millions, trillions, billions, but what really hit home for me is that 2 trillion is the same like everyone on the globe. All the people live there get $250, right? and then you see how significant it is. I think one other additional reason about Apple as well is because of the COVID. Yes, there's a lot of technological things happening, and people will get digitalized. But you have as well, people are home and they're enjoying, of course, the upside from the Apple Store. Yeah, and they're taking all of these profits from people that are playing games, or downloading all kinds of new applications, doing in-app purchases. So there should definitely be a big upside. So I have actually 2 more questions for you. I'm always very curious, like, okay, what are you currently reading as a book, and what is the book that has really made an impact on your decision making?
Okay, so this is late. This is very late, but I just finally read The Hard Thing About Hard Things.
Yeah.
Which is as good as a book as many people recommend.
It's really great. Yeah.
It really, some of the things they're able to pull off, or they were able to pull off. It's interesting to see how some of these vanguards of the VC and tech industry thought about things, and it's very clear thinking. I do actually come back to it. I've actually gone back to it a few more times to just review, some of the wisdom, right? Particularly like, what do you do if an employee, requests, they're looking to move, right, to another team for a higher salary? How do you address that? A lot of these scenarios are played out very well and explained very well in that book. So I think it's a good Bible, good Bible in some way. Yeah. In a lot of ways. So that's what I just finished reading, but I've already been going back to a little bit. And right now I'm reading Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow which is another older book. I mean, I have a lot of books to catch up on. And I just appreciate that, because that makes me think a little bit about more my biases and subconscious. I would say this is a really big point. This is one of the biggest points. I would say the hardest thing that I have had to work on, and I continue to work on today, and I've taken away from working in startups, is having an hypothesis and being prepared for that hypothesis to be wrong, and not having any ego when we make decisions. So thinking fast and thinking slow makes you really examine your unconscious biases. So, for example, with Anayat, we'll talk about with a founder of a company. We often will have very strategic conversations on products and on growth and strategy. And so to say, oh well, I think that if we reduce our price in this area, it'll drive more customers, and the drivers will be okay with it, right? And a lot of people think that way. But actually, the thing is, we should never really make these hypotheses. It's a product thing. You should do a test, right? Always do a test. Don't assume anything, right? Because anything we assume, I would say I'm 50-50. The stuff that I theorize,
it's pretty bad bet. Yeah, it's pretty bad.
I probably would. I probably hypothesize what's actually happening correctly. Maybe half the time. Yeah. The other half the time, it's something else that's really driving it. And so this is something that I've had to instill in. I've instilled in myself, but also I strive to instill with all the companies I work with, not only the founders, but also the management and even junior management, because there's so many decisions that are made in the company, right? And you can't just create a bottleneck and have someone and have everyone approve every decision. So having good judgment also means knowing what you don't, also recognizing knowing what you don't know. And that has been actually the number one thing for me. I realize how little it is I actually do know. And even when you have the data, there's still so many things we don't know.
Yeah, interesting. The hypothesis things, to quickly tap into that, it's like you're sketching, of course, what will happen, but how often do you really try to illustrate more like a real life test, right? You did it with Pathao very clearly. You go to the university and you get your results, right? You did it with Truck Lagbe very clearly. You went to the market and you ask, and it's there, right? But more like on the so go ahead.
For Truck Lagbe, we're having a very difficult time. Here's a real example. For Truck Lagbe, we're having a very difficult time figuring out how to acquire businesses to the platform and SMEs cost effectively, right? But SMEs, right? They make up a huge part of the market, and they will give you regular orders, but they're very small orders, so and they usually want very personalized service because they're a business. But because they're small, it's hard to provide that personalized service from a unit economics level. So when we're very strategic about our cap table. So they always say take smart money. So we had raised capital from the early stage investors of Lalamove and GO-JEK. That was as you mentioned, that was very intentional. And so because we had those early stage investors, we had access to also the founders of those companies. And we'd asked both our experienced investors and through introduction made by those investors, we had access to ask those questions to some of the senior leadership of GO-JEK, Lalamove, Blackbuck, Cargo, all the leading large trucking companies to understand what they did. Yeah. So we learned from all the investors as well as the operators themselves what they did and what worked. And then we tried those things in Bangladesh as well as invented a few ideas ourselves. Lalamove went door to door, right, to SMEs, and would have the salespeople just quickly churning through. We tried that in Bangladesh. It didn't work. People didn't trust. They would try it one time, but when the account manager's gone, they would not do it. They were not. And so we just experimented all of these things and were cold about it. We gave it 2 weeks. That's it. If it didn't work, trashed it, launched the next one. And each project had, I had conviction about one project. Anayat had the CEO had a conviction about another project. The COO had a conviction about another project, and we had to fight that bias, right, to try to be right. Because it doesn't matter if we're right. All that matters is we find the right solution, right? And so we've reached a really comfortable point where my idea that we tried, we put some resources in, didn't work, And now it's like, I told you so. The CEO told me, I told you so. It didn't work. Just like your last idea, I said, you're right. You're 100% right. It didn't work. Something else, right? And there's no ego, because the biggest problem is when people feel like, oh no, it didn't work because of this, so let me just change this one tiny aspect. And because they become married or biased to their idea or their hypothesis. So that has actually been one of the hardest things that I have tried to fight, and other founders have had to fight. And I found that the best founders are the ones that kind of naturally understand this and naturally don't have ego in their decisions. They're happy to admit when they're wrong.
Yeah. I think it's the traditional saying, like, okay, you're able to make one mistake, don't make 2 times the same mistake, right? On the other hand, you don't want to be responsible for investing a shitload of cash into an idea, what you believe, your guts is really good, but eventually it will be a very expensive decision. But eventually you did the hypothesis. There were a few things wrong, but eventually you had a good idea, right? I mean, you're doing B2B business, right? You're doing B2B business right now, so it has worked. So how many times did you need to fail in order that you find the right angle to steer this?
This was actually very scary. We failed maybe 4 or 5 iterations of the B2B sales team. We tried many different forms of it. We tried big teams of low-paid salespeople. We tried small teams of high-paid salespeople. We tried discount strategies. We tried referral strategies. Nothing stuck in this regard, right? Until we figured out that actually you just need to hire like territory managers, which is something very specific about that. We have to hire people who have worked at a Coca-Cola or an FMCG territory manager. They're natural salesmen that have these natural networks that you could leverage, right? At least for the B2B. And then we figured out what it took for the SME as well. And for the SME, it just took initial light touches, but basically we were able to look into our data and determine who were going to be the best potential customers, and then focus resources on those. So it took us time to figure out that these are the kind of customers that we should target because we have a higher win rate with them. And that's kind of like the secret sauce that that we've now developed.
So in order to structure that, and as a takeaway for people who are listening currently, if they want to make a hypothesis about a big decision, what can you, if it's possible at least, can you share 3-4 steps how to make a bigger problem a smaller one and testable? So what would you advise them if you would be their mentor, how to test things in your company fast without spending a shitload of money?
Yeah, I mean, the most basic thing, when the first step, right, that I've seen with most startups, they have to have the ability to run tests, right? They have to have the ability to run A/B tests. So one of the first hires we made at Lagbe, once we had raised capital, was hiring a head of data science to be able to structure our data into a database, run SQL queries, right? Get our team to run SQL queries, right? Because if you can't change you can't improve or change anything unless you measure it. So once we had that in place, then we had the ability to do A/B tests, which is pretty standard, right? Pretty standard. We do it for everything from product to different growth strategies. That's it. You just do an experiment, just like you do in a scientific experiment. And it's why when I was at Pathao, initially I was the one running the SQL queries and doing some statistics, because if you remember in the beginning, I was an economist, right? I worked as an economist with LSE in Oxford. And so all we did was, we did randomized control trials, right? And then would see what intervention had statistical significance. It's no different. You're basically doing experiments, right? But just with less rigor, but you still get you can still understand what's happening. So I recognize the importance of that when it comes to technology, because you constantly have a data set to work with, which you can interpret. So there's no point for a founder or COO or anyone to argue about like, well, I think we should do this, or well, I think I should do this. Just doing experiments with the data.
Find a test.
Find a test.
before we're closing down, what can we expect from you in the coming period? You're very busy with Truck Lagbe. Are you going to identify later on a new potential big startup in the nut, right? What can we expect from you as a founder, as an investor in the coming 5 years?
Sure. I am now, I'm constantly looking for the next strong team. But again, because I'm working independently, the goal is to raise a fund in the future. But I actually do kind of appreciate being able to work with a few companies and dedicate a lot of time, right? Dedicate a lot of time to those few companies and help them grow. So looking for promising founders with great teams that are, attacking a large problem at the right time. And so once I see that, raising capital for these companies is not actually as much of a challenge anymore for Bangladesh if you have the right, if you have the right credibility and you have
the story, the team, and the timing.
And so being able to see that is tough sometimes, but I can see that in Bangladesh just because I've been there for so long, and I really do believe I have a major advantage by being, an American that lived through at a young age, lived through one technological revolution, right? And intimately understood that, and then lived it again when I lived in Indonesia and Vietnam and Hong Kong, right? In the early 2000s, and now seeing that exact same story happening again, pattern recognition in Bangladesh. Right. There will be an Amazon in Bangladesh. There's
100%.
Food kind of there already is. There's already an Uber in Bangladesh. All these things will happen. And so either a local company can come and take that market first before a large company does and does it themselves.
Awesome. Thank you for your time, Ravid. Significantly enjoy that. If people want to connect with you, share some thoughts, what's the best social media channel where they can connect with you guys?
Great. The best way to reach out to me is by email at ravid@rc.ventures.
Okay, awesome.
Or you can always ping me on LinkedIn, Ravid Chowdhury. Should be pretty easy to find. It's a pretty rare name.
Definitely. Thank you very much. We will put as well the information in the show notes so people can follow up on that. Very interesting. I would like to wish you an amazing day. It's already late in New York City, so it's time maybe for one last drink or otherwise take a nap. Thank you very much, buddy, and talk to you soon. Thank you guys for tuning in today at the Founders Tribe podcast. I truly hope you have found some inspiration and the golden nuggets so you can leverage this to lift your founders game. By the way, if you want to stay updated about our weekly releases, then please hit the subscribe button so you will never ever need to miss out and choose which one of the guests you can tune into. If you're planning to raise capital for your startup and would love to discover if you are fundraise ready, if your startup has what it takes, then please take our free signature fundraise quiz, where we will benchmark your answers against our 9-step Date Your Investor framework. As a result, you will receive a 20-page tailor-made recommendation report to be better tomorrow. Want to find out more? Go to www.thestartupchef.com www.thestartupchef.com. Thanks for listening, and I hope to see you in the next episode.